All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back. I have with me today a panel that's been about a couple of months in the making now. I had this idea a while back over the summer while I was teaching an introduction to philosophy class, and we were talking about one of the lessons for the week was to read a portion of William James, The Varieties of Religious Experience. And I was thinking to myself, I can turn this into something on YouTube, right? So, all of these gentlemen who I'm about to introduce have volunteered their time to come speak with me today, and the topic that we're going to be discussing today is the topic of James's book, and that's the nature of religious experience. So, thank you all for joining me. And let's just go around the room and have everybody introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and your religious background. Nimai, I'm going to turn it over to you first.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, for having me. I appreciate the invitation. I am 40 years old. I live in Australia. I am a father, a landscaper. I'm a horticulturist by trade. I've been working with plants since I was about 20 years old. And actually, that came about due to my religious practice as well, ironically enough. And I was born in a Hare Krishna family. My father met the founder of the Hare Krishna movement, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, in 1976. And he became a monk and then a missionary. And he would introduce the Hare Krishna movement to Portugal in the early 80s. He was the first Hare Krishna missionary to go to Portugal. He established it as a valid religion within their government legally. He established it as an institution, a religious institution in Portugal. And my mother was the first Portuguese Hare Krishna devotee.
Wow.
I spent my early youth in Europe till I was 6, and I more or less grew up in Hare Krishna temples. And then we moved back to America, and my father became less directly involved in the Hare Krishna movement. I had a normal job, sort of a normal job. He was self-employed, and oddly so. Well, that's a whole nother story. But I grew up around Hare Krishna temples and communities, and very much enjoyed and appreciated my experience with the Hare Krishnas and that upbringing. I, from a very early age, was very interested in philosophy. I took up my own spiritual practice probably from the age of around 6. And I was initiated, which is something like a baptism, at the age of 18, and received the name Nrshingapali, which you see, if you see my Facebook, it's Nimai Nrshingapali Headmark. That Nrshingapali is a religious name. At the same time, I had, I was initiated at 18, but I had really taken up the practice at around 14. I had my first religious experience, mystical experience, at the age of 14. And then I would have a series of them up until this date. And at around about 25, my brothers had started pursuing an interest in Tantra, which is, you could say, it is the Indian metaphysical systems, and it's the pursuit of mysticism and the mystical experience in a methodical manner. And they introduced me to a mentor, and that mentor helped guide me through various experiences and various states of consciousness both using methodology from, you could say, a Hindu or Vedic paradigm, as well as Judaic related or similar. Like, for example, in Hinduism, you have the concept of the matrikas, or the letters as being the sounds and the letters as being fundamental states of being and reality. And there's methodology to worshiping the matrikas. But he didn't have access to the oral tradition, how to do that. But he did have access to the oral tradition of that within the Judaic system. So the Judaic system, they'll have a similar where they worship the letters. And so I was introduced to the mystical practices of worshiping the letters within a Judaic concept, and had results from that practice. Later on, that same teacher, when I came upon certain situations, I was introduced to methodologies that were distinctly Sufi, and was initiated into their zikir mantras and practiced that, and also had tangible results from that. Likewise, for the practice of Mahamudra, which is a Buddhist practice from Padmasambhava. So at each step of the way, I was given tools to help me for where I was at that did help me. And all along the way, there was experience built on experience, built on experience, built on experience, built on experience, which is what's gotten me to where I am now. And why I'm interested in having this conversation. Hopefully that's enough of introduction. I know that's rather vague. I'm trying to encapsulate a lot of stuff, but thank you very much for having me.
Oh, really appreciate you being here and kind of, like I said before, kind of stepping up the last minute there. I'm going to turn it over now to David Russell, because we have two Davids we're just going to refer to as Russell for the remainder of this interview. Russell, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I just want to say, I enjoyed listening to the stuff that you guys sent over the last couple months, and especially David's story. I really connect with you, David, on the charismatic faith. I really do, man. Our stories are similar in a way, except you went one way, I went the other. But and I'm also appreciative to be here. It's a real honor to be with you guys tonight. And as Michael said, I'm David Russell. I am actually 41. So Nehemiah, you're behind me, not by much. But I am old. Am I the oldest in the group?
You got me beat.
All right. So listen to your elders, folks. No, I'm just kidding. No, I host a podcast, a YouTube channel, and a radio show called Faith Unaltered. We specialize in Christian theology and apologetics and philosophy and all sorts of stuff. Whatever type of conversation you want, we'll have it. I think this last month we were talking creation, and then we switched over to the foundations of reality and conversation on theological determinism. And we invite atheists, like Michael can attest, and we try to make it a atmosphere where people can just talk out the issues, and just air them out, and debate if they want to. We can do it formal, we can do it non-formal, and that's what we specialize in, and it's been successful so far. I used to host Proselytize or Apostatize, and we kind of blended that with the Complete Sinner's Guide, and that's how we got Faith Unaltered. So if you want to check us out, just go to Faith Unaltered YouTube and give us a like and subscribe and share. And yeah, that's pretty much my story in a nutshell. And yes, I am taking the Christian position of on religious experience. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation too, guys.
Yeah, Russell was very hospitable. It's always daunting going into something basically blind, to go into an experience not knowing like what the guest is going to be like and not knowing what the host is going to be like. But Russell's a really nice guy. So.
I can attest to that.
Right, as you're experiencing now, right?
Right now.
David McDonald, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hey guys, my name is David McDonald. So I'm a former youth pastor who's now an agnostic atheist. So I wasn't an ordained pastor, but I worked as youth pastor for a Pentecostal church. I used to speak in tongues. We did laying on of hands. we had some wild prayer meetings. I remember there was a prayer meeting at my church where someone broke their neck and they're in a neck brace, and then in the prayer meeting decided to pray for it to be healed. They decided it was healed, so they cut off his neck brace and then dug their knuckles into his neck to prove that there was no pain anymore from his broken neck. So that was an interesting church. And to be fair, the neck was healed until 2 days later, where he got sent back to emergency. But yeah, we believed in all that stuff. Gold dust, speaking in tongues, all that, and I engaged in a lot of it as well. So you may be asking, why am I an atheist? Well, it's a long and fun journey, but essentially I came to believe that the reasons I had for belief weren't sufficient to warrant their conviction. So I came to analyze everything, and step by step I realized that I no longer could be convinced of the evidence that I had to believe in God, even though I experienced these incredible things. So that got me interested in creating content eventually. I wanted to get involved in the conversations that I was seeing online. I created a YouTube channel, and I also created a podcast, which Michael has been on the podcast before. So before, a while ago, they weren't live, so Michael's episode was re-uploaded to this new channel, so that's why it doesn't have many views. So go check it out. It's a good episode. It's one of my favorite episodes, and it's youtube.com/deepdrinks. So I'll just put it into the chat there. And we're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. When we get there, we're going to be doing a 6-hour charity stream. And so the premise of the conversation is the guest chooses a drink, and then we drink that drink together as we have deep conversations. And it's turned me into a little bit of an alcoholic because my guests usually choose like hard liquor, and for them it's nighttime, and for me it's 8 a.m. So yeah, that's fun. But later today, I'm going to be interviewing Tate Hoskins, who was who grew up as a Southern boy, with a Southern family, and he wears the cowboy hat. And he discovered that he was gay. He told his when he was a young teenager, he told one of his counselors, and then his counselor told his mum, and then he got taken that afternoon to an exorcism. So it's going to be a story about his journey, and what that was like, and things like that. So that's going to be an interesting one. But just to also touch on, my channel isn't just a big atheist talk show. I have Christians on. I've had Hare Krishnas on as well. I have people that I personally find interesting. I invite them to come on, and we have deep conversations. So yep, that's me, and that's my experience.
Awesome.
Well, a pleasure to meet you all.
Yeah, as well. Likewise.
Yes. All right. Well, let's jump into the reason why I assembled you all here today. So the psychologist / philosopher, he's really like a polymath, one of the early American psychologists, and one of the kind of founders of American psychology, William James, who was also interested in philosophical topics, blah, blah, blah. James was one of the first philosophers to write about religious experience in any kind of systematic way. And he provided a really great definition for what a religious experience is. Now, I don't expect you all to agree with this. You all are coming from different backgrounds, but I want to get your reaction. And I want you all to tell me how, from your specific perspective, how you understand religious experience, what you think religious experiences are. So James says that religious experiences are the feelings, acts, and experience of an individual so far as they apprehend themselves to stand in relation to whatever they may consider the divine. This can be, we have a couple of different levels here. We have this on an individual, personal, kind of indescribable level. The individual experiences an ineffable moment, event. This can even, James says, of course, historically, this could happen on a group level, a people, maybe a nation, in the biblical sense, might have an experience, right? The Jewish people at Mount Sinai, for example, or however you want to spin that. So let's just jump into it. What is a religious experience?
Who would like to start?
Go for it.
Go for it. So I think that one of the interesting things is that if you go through those chapters, the 16 and 17 of William James, he makes somewhat there's a you can broadly, you have a category of religious experience, but you also have an overlapping category of the mystical experience. And the mystical experience will generally be a religious experience, but the religious experience isn't necessarily a mystical experience. And I think that's a fairly important place to start. So for myself, I would say the religious experience is something like, and it's going to sound sort of Jordan Peterson-esque, it's like the arriving at the platform of meaning. That arrival may be an emotional experience, or it may be an intellectual experience. So I'll give an example. I myself recently had the religious experience of realizing the significance of Christ. I grew up in southern Mississippi. I was around Baptists and Christians all my life, and I often found them to be very abrasive. And I found the Christian theology rather dark, and I didn't really get it. I was watching a documentary about the Amish, and in this documentary, the gentleman, there was a kid who was experiencing kind of leaving the Amish faith, actually to pursue Christ. And he was describing his epiphany, his realization of Christ. And as he described it, it made sense to me. I had a that's Christ. And the meaning became apparent to me. It was like, I would almost describe it as a tangible meaning, became like vivid in my sense of self. So that epiphany, where the meaning becomes apparent, I would call that the base of a religious experience. Now, on the flip side, you can have a religious experience that is fully a feeling, where you could almost say gripped by the spirit of an ecstasy and it is like coming into the platform of your own being, experiencing your own being in a way that you've never quite experienced before. And there's two levels to that. You can have an ecstatic experience where the ecstasy it seems to arise from yourself, where it comes forth. And the best equation that I could give in my own life that describes that feeling, that might make sense to someone who hasn't had it as a religious experience, would be the swell of emotion at the birth of your child. The closest thing that I could equate to that is the swell of emotion at the birth of your child. That emotion comes from yourself, but it's on a level and a magnitude that's pretty hard to describe to someone who's never had it. On the flip side, there is another type of emotion or ecstasy that you can experience, which feels like when I could only describe it from my own experience. I could describe it like when you watch a tornado, and the tornado kind of like the funnel comes down and touches the ground, and then it obliterates whatever it touches. It's kind of like that, where it's grander than yourself. It's bigger than you by a magnitudes that you couldn't describe. And when it touches you, you feel it's not easy to describe, but you're obliterated by the weight of it. Both of those are arriving. There's an arriving at that place, and I would describe that place the place of meaning. The transcend. People will use terminology like the transcendence or transcendental, or symbolic. It's the platform of meaning, as far as I can tell from all of my experience. Then the mystical can overlap that. So you can have a religious experience where it's meaningful. You have a meaningful experience, but it might not be particularly mystical. You might not have transcended your sense of self or your time and space, or where there is qualities of the mystical that generally there's a sense of the transcendence of time and space, the transcendence of self as you know it, the feelings of knowledge pouring into you. These are all qualities of the classic mystical experience, and they can overlap, but they don't necessarily do so. That's what I would say about what is a religious experience. Do you have thoughts on that, gentlemen?
Well, yeah. Well, like I would just jump in there and say, okay, I would call what you just described in a fascinating way illumination, right? But I do understand your parallel to Peterson, and he actually is coming at this from, and I don't know if Jacques and Matthew are the brothers. I can't remember their last name. He's interviewed them both, and they come at this from an Orthodox. And they go much deeper in this, and it's crazy, man. I mean, it's very enlightening. And they look at things like they think reality's fractal, right? And then they go into,
I agree with that. I would hold that as a fundamental truth.
So they look at it like that. And the nature of reality is fractal, and they go through that meanings, the meaning stuff. Personally, like I said, I call what you described. And what I'm trying to say is I want to agree with you on part of it, right? So I think that that illumination can be prompted by and be a religious experience, because it could be prompted by God, right? Yeah. So I would say, I would agree with partially that, and I do think that can overlap. And I would go even further, though. I think there's evidentially compelling religious experiences, right? I think they propose a real problem to naturalism. And I think I'm sitting here with people that aren't settled naturalists, right? Like they're not like fully settled into it. Like David was saying, he's agnostic. So, I mean, it leaves wiggle room for him to be like, okay,
I'll always change my mind with new evidence, but I'm pretty much a naturalist, at this stage.
Yeah, but those experiences, even that you had, you just put them in that unknown category, so to me it's not like it's fully settled in that degree, and like you said, you change evidence there. But I think examples of religious experiences can go to the subjective experience, right? It can do that, and I don't think that's unreasonable.
What do you mean by that?
What do I mean by what specific part?
When you say that the religious experience can go to the subjective, you're describing an experience. So isn't subjectivity somewhat inherent in a religious experience?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. Yeah. So I would say that there is this subjective experience that people have, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the better phrase. And I also think that they're reasonable to have it. I think that it's not a defeater for disproving the existence of God, but I also believe that there's those evidentially compelling religious experiences, which then you get into might include like visions, auditions, later verified unambiguous miracles and healings, fulfilled prophecy, supernatural rescues, intersubjective religious experiences, and multiple people simultaneously. Basically, that's multiple people having the same religious experience. Yeah. So I would say that that's all in it. So and there, I
would definitely 100% agree with you.
Yeah.
I would say that I tried to, in one sense, use you could say there's a vagueness, a deliberate vagueness. It's almost as being abstract on purpose, because the more specific you would get, the more you start actually limiting that thing. And so I think that on all counts, I would agree with you. I would also acknowledge that there is a whole segment of experiences that are metaphysical, that don't meet the physical don't seem to fit into physics or a naturalist worldview, that could be mystical, that I don't include in the mystical experience.
Russell, I want you to finish your thought there, and then David McDonald, I'd like to get your input here.
Yeah, so basically, just to bring it all to a head, I would say that that's kind of how I would define a religious experience. It's not just personal. There's several categories that we can look at and say, look, this can fall under a religious experience, and it's not. RE is not just a small field. It's not pertaining just to the person. Where if I have this personal experience, it might help somebody, if I tell them about it. But then again, I'm not going to use it in a formal debate for evidence because I'm presenting something else at that point. You know what I mean? So, but go ahead, David.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify something. So, in regards to my position on naturalism, my experiences that you said, Russell, was that I don't know, right? I don't know where it comes from, but I still have no reason to think that there's a supernatural origin to that. So, like, I don't know, for example, I don't know exactly how lightning is created. I could research it and find out quite easily just reading Wikipedia or something, but you know, it's not, I don't think it's supernatural. I don't think Zeus is up there like hurling lightning bolts or anything. So like the experiences that I've had incredible experiences, crying in front of like all my peers and friends when I was like 15, being changed overnight, feeling drunk on the spirit, things like that. But at the same time, so I was attaching a truth claim to those experiences. I was saying Christianity must be true, and these experiences must be reflective of some sort of supernatural reality. And at the same time, my stepmother was having experiences at it might have even been a Hare Krishna temple, or it might have been they were doing some sort of Tibetan prayer for something that was happening. And she was talking about how they all started rolling on the floor laughing, and this spirit over this form of hysteria came over them. And they were just, going nuts. And at the time, I had to think about that as like, oh, classic demons, right? They were the demons doing that. But she was attaching a truth claim to her experience. She was saying, well, this experience means that there is something spiritual happening, and we did experience something, but both of us are pointing in completely opposite directions. So I thought my religion was exclusive. She thought her religion wasn't exclusive, but and so for me, I actually struggle with the definition that James gave, unless we are referring to the divine as something like a psychological thing, not a real thing. So for me, my wife says that when she goes to musicals, she has the same experience that she had at church. And like these strong emotional experiences or different. And so just to clarify, I don't know if I'm agnostic to where a lot of these experiences came from, but I have no reason to believe that they were supernatural until something like the supernatural is demonstrated to be possible or true. But in regards to religious experience, I would just like to ask you, you guys, like, how do you differ between a religious experience and just a really strong emotional one? Even in groups of there's even been do you consider like group hysteria where people just can't stop laughing or dancing or whatever that's happened in history? Are they religious experiences? Because
I wouldn't say so. No.
Okay, so can I first piggyback off of that, David, real quick? Like, what I wasn't trying to assume what you believed. You didn't have to explain it because that's not what I'm trying to do. What I was saying is and you kind of say it in your statement here. What I'm talking about is I think religious experience provides a problem for settled naturalism. The critic that is settled in naturalism, right? So where you put it in a category of I still don't have a reason to believe it's Thor or Jesus, or Zeus. I'm just saying you're still not settled as far as okay, I'm settled on this. It's this way and this way only. You know what I mean? So that's kind of
it's more to do with it's more to do that I just don't know of any other let's come up with another world, paranaturalism, ghost naturalism. I don't know what supernatural is, you know what I mean? So for someone to say, well, you don't know it's not supernatural, it's yeah, of course, but I have no reason to think it's not just natural in origin.
That's fine. But that still goes to the point, it's not settled for you because you're still putting in there, I don't know. You see what I mean?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's agnostic. It's properly agnostic. Properly agnostic means that it's not settled. It can't be. It's not a definite. That's
and when you there's no fault in you questioning the experiences you're having and the experiences your mother was having.
Everybody else is having.
And the thing is that and this is one of the things I learned from your video, and I'll get to, let me get to that later. The experiences that you and your mom are having, okay, it's easy for us to misidentify the religious experience that does happen. It's easy to misidentify. So one of the biggest things, that these people like, I think her name is Carolyn Franks Davis, does a huge case study on the evidential force of religious experiences. And she comes up with 4 common core criterias. And, I don't want to maybe I won't get into hers, but it's, Dumsday also comes up to one, and he says, they're not all universal, and sometimes they're open to interpretation. But Davis, she puts together a nice list as well, and comes up with a common core that can be seen in all of them. So the fact that you guys are still having similar experiences, I mean, I don't think it discounts a religious experience. I mean, you can't definitively say it discounts a religious experience. That would presuppose something else. When you presuppose them before you get into it, you know what I mean? So I'll kick it to Nehemiah. I've been talking too long.
Let me jump in real quick, Nehemiah, because I want to ask this question that was raised in the chat, maybe as a part of your response here, because it kind of relates to what we were talking about. How would you distinguish, and I guess this is mostly directed at Nehemiah and Russell, what would be the distinction between a true religious experience and a maybe like just a psychological experience, for lack of a better word? Go ahead, Nehemiah. I'm sorry.
I think that there is a consistency of the experience. There is a consistency of realization that comes from the experience. There is a shared. It's not just the subjective. Just like if we were to make evidence in the here and now in a naturalistic sense, is that it's verifiable, it's objective, and that we can, and it's repeatable. This is a sort of. Would you agree with that, David? Does that sound more or less the way we?
Yeah. Would you say that? Like, if I was to say, like, if we were to both be standing next to a fire and we both put our hands out, and we both experience the heat from the fire, is that that would be a shared experience? Yeah,
that's a shared experience.
Okay, cool. So you're saying that that with religious experience, like the grouping.
So, for example,
is shared.
There is a consistent. Now, the content can change. Just like, for example. Right now, there's a lot of discussion within the realm of the psychedelics. Like, psychedelic studies are coming up forward, and it's actually quite a pertinent question because it's talking about the mystical experience, whether or not psychedelics are a reliable analog of the mystical experience. I myself hold the view that they absolutely are, having had plenty of my own mystical experiences, both on and off psychedelics. I stand apart from my orthodoxy entirely in that regard, and hold it as valid. So, using the psychedelic experience as an analog, we could say that the content of your psychedelic experience can be vastly different. But the place of meaning that you arrive is very consistent. People have the mystical experience, the qualities of their mystical experience is extremely consistent.
Yeah.
And people who've had that experience can recognize it in other people who talk about their experience. I myself personally love watching YouTube videos of people describing their near-death experiences. Everybody's near-death experience, the content of it may be different, but the places that they arrive, there's levels of it, but it's very consistent. So I agree with James's assertion that religion itself has its foundation on some point in somebody's mystical religious experience, and that gets codified. And so I do think scripture is helpful in helping to understand and to judge. I myself would say something along the line, so far in my life, let me put it this way, so far in my life, my mystical experiences have been within the are similar and related to many other people's mystical experiences. Something about that strikes as true. We would just like you said, if you put your hand by the fire, I put my hand by the fire, we both feel heat. We go, oh, the heat is true. So
Mm.
in my life, in my mystical experiences, it wasn't purely subjective. I've had experiences that I've had with my wife. I've received things in mystical, like I received mantras in Sanskrit that took me 2 to 3 years to actually translate and figure out. That came out of the ether. I have no way to explain that.
Well, that's interesting.
That is interesting.
Just to quickly touch too, just to re-clarify, I guess I believe religious experiences like happen, but I
Yeah.
guess I would take more of a position of like a chicken before the egg. So like in approach that, like, I guess humans have these experiences. I would even argue that animals have these experiences as well, like dogs and stuff. You can see them dream, which is a form of conscious stuff happening, right? So I believe that, like, you know, people have these experiences, and maybe that's like a good way to, like, you know, just to sound like an idiot who doesn't know what he's talking about, this could be a good way to explain religiosity, possibly, like that humans have these incredibly vague and hard to understand but consistent experiences, and they attach stories to these consistencies and these experiences.
I think
because
that
of a way of explaining what's going on, and that would explain that. Like, so when I read the Bible, I sometimes, even when I read like 1 John, it is beautiful to me. Like, I still feel these like incredible feelings. But at the same time, when I was in Bali, drunk poolside with my wife, I was listening to the Bhagavad Gita because I wanted to learn more about Hinduism on the island. And chapter 6 of that book just hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt like I was reading something from Isaiah or Psalms, and it was just amazing. But they've obviously have very different worldviews. And I
don't know that they do, actually.
Okay.
To be frank, I think well, I mean, on one level, I would acknowledge that there's different perspectives, but just because that there's different perspectives, like we could look at the world from all kinds of perspectives, and it's still the world. And so I don't know. My personal feeling is that they don't invalidate each other. I think that some people will. Like, for example, you say the word real, then you're going like, oh my God, now we open up a whole quagmire. What is real? And you're going to, same, like, for example, a lot of Hare Krishnas would not say that they're Buddhists, and they would hold same way Christians would go, oh, Buddhists hold emptiness as the void, as the ultimate reality. Oh, you know.
Yeah, ridiculous.
Well, yeah, exactly. Except until you experience the void, and then you go, oh, that's what they're talking about. Now, I would happily call myself a Buddhist, 100%. I would happily call myself a Christian, 100%. Now, Christians won't think I'm a Christian because I don't do Christianity the way they want. They fit it in a box. And my experience suggests that the what we would call the divine is like the border. It's not real the way this is real. And at the same time, all that we see as real is in that. And it is abstract on a level that it is not bound in any sense by the limitations that we impose with our concepts, which is, my opinion, the glory of Buddhism. Buddha was not making a religion. Buddha was a yogi. He learned Shiva yoga. He gave yoga as a non-sectarian means to arrive at an experience. The experience that he brings you to is the state of non-conceptual, where you've erased all the concepts and you're residing purely in consciousness itself. And then from there, what is, boom, you can have it for yourself. But he doesn't define it. He doesn't say, oh, it's definite. He leaves it, no. It's a really elusive. No, it's not real. The deity's real. No, the deity's not real. It's existent, but it's not existent. But it's a paradox. And and all of my religious experience, the paradox, the point of paradox, where it's like, oh, that was it. It always arrived there. Oh, and I accept that to be, when you're there, that's real is real, and I'm okay with that. I don't need to impose it on you. I find that your point of view is perfectly valid for you, and that's leading down to another part of our conversation, I'm sure. I find it interesting that your approach was, rather than going, my mom had an experience, I had an experience. Experience is consistent. Maybe this exclusivism, there's something wrong with exclusivism, and maybe I need to be reading the Bible in another way.
Let's go.
I wouldn't
Well-
use it.
Well,
Sorry, let's go, David, and then Russell. I want to hand it over to you to get your response there.
yeah. So I guess if anyone is interested, I think it's on Vimeo. You can go watch Miracles for Sale, which is by Darren Brown.
Yep.
And he teaches this regular person to go out in the street and do faith healing with no power of God or anything, and these people get healed, right?
Sure.
So, like, for me, it just seems more plausible for it to be a psychological phenomenon that we have. Now, when it comes to like evidence, right? Like, not evidence. Sorry, I won't say it. Like, when it comes to like people revealing things, like you reveal something in Sanskrit, or let's say someone gets a prophecy that is like mind-blowingly accurate. If you were to do an investigation and you would discover that that was, let's say someone's legs grew back from a healing or something, I still don't know how. You still need to answer so many questions to get there, but let's not go down that route, because that's more talking about like miracles and stuff. But I was actually interested in how Russell feels about what you just said, and also if Russell, if you would consider Nehemiah a Christian, or if you would consider, because you're the resident Christian here, so maybe you can talk. But like, how do you view what Nehemiah said? Are you in agreement? Because I'd be really interested to hear your perspective.
There's parts of it I would agree with. Of course, I mean, we both claim, lay claim to the supernatural, right? So I mean, we do believe in the supernatural, and we believe it's a very big part of this reality as well. So there is some agreement there. Of course, like he was saying, I think there's issues with this common core, right? So like you're talking about this common core that is proposed by Carolyn Franks in her case studies. A lot of these do depend on the case studies you're doing, right? So if you're looking at these experiences, you're going to have to look at them and say, okay, what can I do? Is it purely psychological? Well, how's psychology doing actual healing? So I mean, that's kind of like where I would arrive, and why, and when you said in your opening, like your whole methodology was to take off your Christian glasses, right? And to put on what other glasses did you put on?
So I realized that when investigating the evidence for my worldview, I had to remove as much bias as possible. So I took off everything. I took off the fact, like I had to like take off my Christian hat, my white Australian hat, my man hat. I had to take off all these perspectives that I had, in order to, as best as I could psychologically, in order to look at the evidence as unbiased as possible, because I came to believe that was the best way to analyze evidence.
But nobody can really do that, brother, because I mean, you're going to have a bias.
Oh, of course.
Now your bias is going to be psychology. So why is that better than the bias of Christianity?
Yeah, because
what made it more valid to you?
It might not be like, but the point is, like, what I was trying to do, and this isn't, I'm not saying I was successful at removing my Christian glasses or my psychology glasses or whatever, but what I was trying to do is remove as much bias as possible. So I was trying to look at the evidence and not try and read into it what I want, not try and read into what I don't want. I just want to look at the evidence and see, okay, does this is this sufficient reason to support the claim that it's trying to make, right? So, for example, like this is just an example off the top of my head, but let's say I'm reading the Bible and the Bible says something like, Genesis 1, it talks about, the young earth, talks about, Adam and Eve and things like that. It's like, okay, we know this book was written these times. I'd like to look up the historical evidence for that. And I look at the similarities between different religious groups and stories, like the Epic of Gilgamesh and stuff, and I go, okay, is it reasonable to think that there was a global flood that the Aboriginals didn't notice for 40,000 years in Australia, that killed every living creature? Like I look at the evidence and go, this just doesn't make sense. So therefore, it doesn't mean that Christianity isn't true, or Judaism isn't true, or Islam isn't true. It just means that the part about Noah's flood has to be either allegorical, or all this evidence has to be like, what's more likely, that this evidence is just wrong, or is it just that we have fossils and all that stuff, or is it that maybe the story's wrong? And so for me, the story made much more sense to view the story and go, okay, the story has to be wrong in regards to things like Noah's Ark and stuff, you know?
Yeah, no, I hear where you're going. It's just I think that once you take off one lens, you're putting another lens. So you
Oh
take off
yeah,
the
sure.
Christian lens, you put in a skeptical lens. And I
Oh
don't
yeah.
think that bears any weight when you're actually examining the evidence. I really don't.
Okay, that's fair.
But
I would say that
I would say
by
when you look
taking
at
them off,
something,
I was taking off my Christian lens. By taking off my
so
Christian
it
lens,
seemed like you
it
were
was
already
adding a skeptical
determined to
lens.
go a certain route, in my opinion. So it kind of
Okay.
seemed like you had that foundation in your mind, like, okay, look, I'm going to examine it from this way instead of this way. So that's kind of like where I'm coming from.
Wait, if I was examining both perspectives, like, so I would often, like, what I would do is, like, when I was looking up the Noah's Ark, for example, I would go onto Answers in Genesis and I would try and see what Answers in Genesis was saying, because they held to a really, like, a view that I held. And I would go, okay, this is how they explain away the 50 billion species of plant and animal life that we have on the planet, and this is how they, and I would look at all that evidence, and then I would look at, like, the evidence for, like, geology, and everything else, and I'm like, this doesn't seem to
it doesn't add
line
up.
Like, no.
Yeah, no, it doesn't line up.
So I don't know how.
That's personally why I think that the realm of meaning is actually has more weight.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think there's you're looking at that.
That the stories themselves are told as history. They're meant to be held as history, but not in the account, in the meaning. And that history, like Jordan Peterson had a conversation just recently with Jonathan Peugeot and
Peugeot,
Derek,
that's who I was going to talk to. His brother's Matthew.
That's
what they're talking about. Yep.
He described the stories as being true, not as necessarily limited to a fact, an occurrence. In fact, he says to limit them as a mere event is actually to limit the validity of what they are, which is something that was true, that is true, that is happening, that is happening constantly, and is eternally happening. And so, I think that learning how to read scripture, how to digest its meaning, is a whole nother thing. And I don't think that them being either factual events or not are in of themselves make it true or not true. That's my personal opinion. Now, that would go against the orthodoxy of pretty much any religious.
Well, he was just defending Christianity there on that. No, I would say I would echo.
But I always find it interesting as someone who didn't grow up a Christian. Generally speaking, atheists or agnostics who were Christians, they tend to always go to agnostic atheist or agnostic rather than. I mean, I can't say never, because I know most Hari Krishnas have converted, but. Generally speaking, there isn't a let me pick up other stuff. And why was it that your religious experience didn't make you go, and that the fact that your mother had a religious experience in another religious tradition, why did that not inspire you to look at religious tradition broadly as something worth pursuing?
Well, yeah. So for me, the same reason I don't start prescribing religious experiences to musicals, because my wife has a tremendous experience in musicals.
Okay, but when you say a religious experience, so again, I'll go back. So you actually asked me the question: do I think those are the same? On one level, I would acknowledge that they are, because a religious experience is a self-experience. So it's an experience of yourself. I would go as far to say it's the experience of your fundamental self. And then when you arrive in your own swabhava, or your own self-nature, you have an experience. You can be brought about that experience through anything that helps you, that brings you to a place where it transcends your own ego. If you are deeply absorbed in anything, one of my most significant religious experiences took place when I was laughing hysterically. And I recognized in that laughter, I was laughing so hard that I recognized myself recognizing myself. And it was an empty stillness that it was a deep, empty stillness. It was like silent on a level that I can't describe. And when I recognized it, it rang like a bell in its silence. That was
but,
laughter. That was
but
a deep and meaningful religious experience. So I don't think that the religious experience is limited to religion. And I think that the world is divine. That when you explore the meaning of the world, you will find God in everything. There's
well, hang on. Let
nothing
me.
that is not that God is not
Can,
in.
can I
And
push
so
back a little bit?
I don't have
Because
a sure, go for it.
so I just told you about my wife's religious
Yep,
experience at musicals. If you accept that, are you
I
going to go
do.
away from this conversation, going to more musicals, watching?
I have no problem accepting that your wife could have an experience of
No,
herself
no.
in which she
But are you
transcended
gonna are
through
you
a
gonna are
musical. I have
you gonna
no problem
go?
with that.
But are you gonna go look
It's
into
not
musicals now?
limited. It's not limited to that.
No, but
It's
what
not
I'm asking
limited
is
to that.
so
It's
you
I'm
asked
not.
before. You asked
Do
before
I? Would I be
if I
opposed
would.
to going to musicals? Nope.
No, not opposed. You asked me if I was, why when my mom had my stepmom
Yeah,
had spiritual experiences and I had spiritual
sure.
experiences, why I didn't then start looking at those experiences. And I said the
Yeah,
same reason I don't attach a truth
yeah.
or religious experience to my wife's musical experiences. So and then you challenged me on that. So I'm asking, would you are you going to now leave this conversation and start booking in musical tickets because you believe that
I
there's
don't
some
under.
authentic truth there?
No, the authentic truth is her experience. Now, what was
Okay.
the depth of her experience? What was the knowledge that came through that experience? What was the transformation that took place in her life? There is a scale. It's not all the same. I'm not equating
Yeah.
everything. It's not all the same, but it doesn't invalidate that one is on the bottom of the scale doesn't invalidate because the other one's at the top of the scale. It doesn't invalidate the one at the bottom of the scale. But there
But the
is a
only way.
scale.
Yeah, but the only way can I assume that the only way that the only way you grade the scale is by pointing to other traditionally
No,
religious texts?
you grade the scale by the
Mhm.
objective, what it actually what happens, what
Okay,
actually does it happen, what transformation does it do in your life? Actually, is how I would rate the scale. The high end of
okay.
that spectrum will have a tremendous transformation in your life.
So like recovering from heroin addiction, would that be like a religious experience?
It could be if it was related to a religious experience. So, for
Well, no,
example, somebody could have to go and take iboga and in that have a profound realization of reality, which allows him to walk away and never take up heroin again. And I would
but
say that religious experience resulted in him putting down heroin, and that's a clinically tested. That's been done over and
yeah,
over and over again.
of course. But what I'm saying, so I'm just trying to understand. So you're saying
Sure.
that a religious experience can be something like going to a musical, and then there
Well,
is
you could have a I would say you could have a religious experience at a musical.
Yeah, but
The musical isn't in of itself a religious experience.
Okay,
100%.
great. So we agree then. So what about traditionally religious experiences? How do you determine that they are religious experiences?
They have a set of characteristics.
Okay, and how do you determine what are the correct characteristics and what are the
they repeat themselves over and over again, and they're repeated in the religious literature as well. So there's a consistency, actually, truly. But
so there's a consistency in people
of
giving up heroin addiction. So people can give up heroin addiction, they gain more weight, they usually get a whole lot more of peace in their life.
There's also a consistency of the heroin addiction when it comes from a mystical experience versus when it comes from physically getting over heroin. Oftentimes, the people who have a mystical experience that have heroin, they have no withdrawal whatsoever. They don't have any withdrawal. They don't go through any of the physical characteristics that are typical of a heroin giving up heroin.
So let's let me interject here. Russell's been quiet for a little bit. Russell, go ahead.
Yeah. So what I was thinking here is like, okay, so what are some of these common things that Nehemiah is attesting to? And again, I go back to Davis on this, and she gave in her extensive studies on this. She said the four things that are common and consistent in all these religious experiences, whether they're NDEs, whether they're REs, whether they're CECREs, is that one, the physical world is not the ultimate reality.
Yep.
Two, there is a true self that participates in ultimate reality.
Yep.
Three, the ultimate reality is holy, eternal, and of supreme value. And four, this holy power can be experienced. So these are the commonalities in all these three different things. Nehemiah, do you agree or not?
can we add to, like, actually really like William James's 4 categories or characteristics, where he describes that the markers of a 4 markers of a mystical experience are ineffable. The experience is incapable of being described and must be directly experienced to be understood. Noetic. The experience is understood to be a state of knowledge through which divine truths can be learned. Transient. The experience is limited in duration and passive, in the sense that the experience is, you're not able to control the arrival or departure of the experience. I think that's all consistent in all of my own personal experience. There is a, if you go and you look at the psychedelic research and what's going on in there, they have a questionnaire that they put forth to individuals who partake in studies, and I think the questionnaire has been established more or less to be the clinical baseline of a mystical experience. And why don't we just go through and quickly read these 30 questions?
Let's let Russell finish this point. Yeah,
Nehemiah, back to my thought here, though, and I think you'll agree with me. And this is, I think, where me and you will be at agreement, because obviously we have theological areas where we would disagree, obviously.
Sure.
But I think what we're trying to tell the agnostic is that you're not going to be able to just get rid of religious experience by saying it's a psychological projection.
Agreed.
That's what we're trying to say. And there's too much study, there's too much research throughout time.
There's too many shared experiences. There's too many in my own life. I've witnessed. I've had experiences directly with my wife where we've both had the same experience. And like I said, I have received mantras in Sanskrit, which I'm not a Sanskrit scholar. I'm not capable of translating Sanskrit. Well, I'm more capable now, but at the time that it happened, it was, and it took me 3 years to put it all together. It was a coded means to another mantra, and it was incredibly beautiful. And that happened as a visionary experience.
I wanted to add too that, I'm not going to pit against Nehemiah here today. That's not my goal. My goal is not to say, well, he's not a Christian, because we're not examining Christianity versus Hare Krishna right now. I just want to. I really am trying to focus on the nature of general religious experiences, because Christianity doesn't say that Hare Krishnas can't have a religious experience. It doesn't say that. And I know, David, and even Michael, you probably came from a fundamentalist background that preached demons and stuff. I mean, you even said it, Dave. It must be demons. That's not true. God never relegates. How would other people get saved if even the religious experience doesn't always have to be salvific, right? God could simply have a plan down the road and save somebody from something, give them instruction, and there'd be a different purpose involved. And that's kind of like where I'm coming from. Christianity doesn't put God in a box. It says that God's sovereign and he's almighty. And you know what? If he decides to give a Muslim a dream about Jesus, he turns it into Nabil Qureshi and does apologetics out in the world.
If you had a dream of Ajna, or let's say you read the Bhagavad Gita and you felt these over, what would you do with that?
So here I would, of course, I'd have to go with my own coherence, because this is, now you're taking me through a large epistemological journey, right? So we're talking about the foundation, kind of like the ontic referent of these religious experiences, right? We're not going into the specificity of, now I have to apply my epistemology and my philosophy.
I'm just more asking, what would you do if you had a dream?
I'd measure it up to reality, right? So if they were both exclusive, I would test the claims. Okay, let me give you this example, and this is probably a lot easier, right? So Muslims say they have a religious experience where they're bathed with a green light, right? Now, I'm not going to discount the religious experience, right? However, I'm going to say, okay, what do Muslims say when it comes to what I believe, right? So what I believe about this specific worldview, okay, they say Jesus isn't crucified. Well, my experience of reality is telling me that Jesus was crucified, and the evidence is heavily in that way. So yes, I do incorporate my evidence. I do take those steps. So yeah, I mean, I do go that route. But as far as the foundation is, I don't.
But how how
go
could
ahead.
you have that dream of Krishna, or let's say it's more profound than that. Let's say it's a message of Sanskrit, just like Nimai, right? That you have this incredible experience happen to you. Let's say it's more powerful than anything you've experienced in Christianity. Why wouldn't that point to truth, like something happening in the spirit realm?
Why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't my
Yeah.
experience? Why can't I accept my experience of reality? Now, you're giving me a hypothetical, right? So
Yeah.
I could just go along with that hypothetical and be like, wow, that would be amazing for me. How do I explain it? I would have to go through a process and steps of examining it, right? Examining what I experienced it and then comparing it. Does it go against Christianity? Does it go against what I'm saying? And where do I come when there's a conflict where I'm not settled on? Well, I'm going to have to not be settled until I continue to examine it, right? I'm not going to give up at a certain point. I'm going to keep going because I think if it's that significant in my life, I'm going to continue to investigate. I'm going to continue to explore. Why? Because I believe as a human being, I think God has made us best when we're in a state of discovery. Humanity is in a state of discovery. And I think that we make the greatest leaps when we're in a state of discovery. I mean, shoot, the past 60 years, all the things we've discovered in the past 60 to maybe 100 years, we've went from like riding horses to fast cars and sending rockets up into space. I mean, mankind is at their best when they're in a state of discovery. And I think that's the way God designed us. And I think that also speaks to a good teleology in the long run. But that's not the topic. What I'm trying to prove here and what I'm trying to get at tonight is the nature of a religious experience. And I think we can establish that. And I think it provides a real problem for those that are settled in naturalism.
Let me interject with a question real quick based on kind of what you said, David, because this was raised in the chat, and I think it's a good question. So if we're talking about religious experience as this sort of universal thing that happens to human beings across time, across culture, what I think this question is getting at, and P. Barnes, you tell me if this is not what you were asking, but P. Barnes says, what attributes are different between a euphoric sensation, such as listening to music, and a religious experience? In other words, Nimai brought up the use of psychedelics. I don't want to go too far down that route. I think that's a separate question. But if these things are reproducible, right, without any sort of ontological spiritual basis, what distinguishes them from what David described his wife having at the concert?
Okay.
So go ahead.
That gets expressed fairly well in James's description, actually, and especially when he touched on the noetic quality. So the noetic quality is really where things, the noetic and the ineffable, they clearly differentiate the experience of just taking it from a euphoric, maybe even emotional experience to something vastly different. So I'll tell one of my experiences. I'll share one of my experiences with you to kind of.
Before you do that, can I just explain before you jump in your experience? I would say it like this. I would say that if you want to look at this from a psychological Western viewpoint, right? I would say it makes sense that we would have these certain pleasure points, these certain things going off in our body, because you would expect that. You would expect that in a religious experience because we're not just a soul, we are a body and soul. So we would experience these things. There would be that commonality. So I will just pitch it back to you. That would be my response.
So I would say that on the spectrum, you'll start in something that's like the feeling of emotion. It might be the feeling of energy. Like you can have, you can call spiritual or mystical experiences that involve the innate energy that's within you to move, and when it does all kinds of chaotic things. You can look up and read about Kundalini syndrome. This is a medical term. to see what happens with people when that happens in an unexpected situation or unguided. But you'll move into the noetic and the ineffable. For myself, I had a profound mystical experience. I was about 20 years old. I had been working. I was just new in Australia, and I didn't have a working visa, so I had to do shit jobs. And I was working in a restaurant washing dishes. And it was a late shift on a Friday in King's Cross, which is like Bourbon Street for the Americans. And I had a conversation with an Israeli girl. And in this conversation, we were going back and forth about the merits or not of vegetarianism, the spiritual value of vegetarianism. And in my upbringing, when you have a philosophical discussion, generally speaking, the way the format that goes is you quote, you say, you take your stance or your position, and then you quote scripture to back that up. So each way I was quoting from Bhagavad Gita, quoting from Srimad Bhagavatam, and every single time I would do that, she'd swat it down with my book, your book, my book, your book. That was all she would say. My book, your book. And I became rather frustrated, but I had to acknowledge it was true. I had to acknowledge that that was a perfectly reasonable position to take. And on my way home, I was in the train station, sitting on the platform, and I came to the conclusion that I would have to try to, if I was to try to explain the existence of God, I would have to try to do that in my own language, in my own words. And I would have to do that in a way that was self-evident, that I couldn't rely on scripture, my book, your book, to do that. And so I was thinking deeply and I was deconstructing the universe. I wanted to, there was a statement that A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami I grew up hearing, which was that the Paramatma, the super soul, is present within every atom. And I thought, oh, if I could deconstruct the universe in a way that was self-evident to arrive at God, I could show God to someone. And I started deconstructing the universe, sitting there in my contemplation. And when I arrived at atoms, I ran into a problem, which was apparently they don't really deconstruct. They rearrange themselves constantly. And it was plausible, even possible, for me to attribute eternality to the universe in that way. It felt like a hard wall. And for a moment, which I can't quite describe, it was like an existential crisis. And I can only describe it like dropping everything I thought I knew, like putting it all down and going, oh, I really don't know. And then genuinely asking, like, how is it? And in that moment, reality as I saw it disappeared. Everything dropped. Went, and I saw white, like what I could only describe as an infinite ocean of white light that went on forever. There was only white light. It was a warm white light that went forever. I remember scanning from left to right. And I remember the feeling being of like, I even just describing to you, all my hair stands on end. Like everything goes, woo. And the feeling was like, oh, wow. I felt entirely one with that. And as I was feeling the exhilaration of, wow, I heard a voice deep within me. And it said, I'm not in the atoms. I am the atoms. And just like that, I was back. Now, I don't remember getting off the seat of the platform and getting on the train, but when I came back, I was on a train. And I was surrounded by drunk people in various states of drunkenness. And the scene was so ludicrous. everybody's idea of someone having a sort of like enlightenment moment is like a yogi in a mountain cave, or Buddha under the Bodhi tree, or some guy in deep meditation. Nah, I was on a train surrounded by drunk people. And I just burst out laughing. And so that experience was marked by it was marked by the whole world as I knew it disappeared. It was the whole thing was gone, and knowledge just pours into you. And this is consistent further and further you go. And it goes deeper, it goes more, it goes further and further. And so each time there was something about reality that was shared with me as knowledge. Oh, this is how it is. Boom. And so that's the difference. Now you can have a self experience. You can sit in your own self nature and have an emotional experience, and that's genuine. But the depth of where that goes, there's a depth that goes. There's a spectrum that goes, whoom, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the impact, the bigger it gets on you, gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And generally, what ends up happening is you become more open-minded, you become more kind, more compassionate, more caring, less confined, and that's also consistent.
David, I want to turn it over to you, and then Russell,
Me?
I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions. That was a very profound experience, obviously. Do you think it was God saying, "I am the atoms"?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool. Well, my question would then be to Russell: do you believe God is atoms? Do you believe that was accurate?
I don't think God is limited to atoms, but I think God is everything, quite literally.
Yeah, God is the atoms. But Russell, would you say, you're muted, would you say that God is? Would you agree with that? Would you say God is atoms? Like
I would say he's the creator of them, and he's the. I think, again, remember I told you early on. I think that even our religious experience can. We can misidentify, right? We can misidentify certain things, this and that. Like I said, there's obviously there's going to be theological difference between me and Nehemiah. I mean, we've already established that, where I think God is revealed in Jesus Christ. I think that's, God, I think Jesus is God. So would I say, I believe Christianity is true. So I do believe that, Jesus is God. So that's kind of like where I'd be coming from. So, but that's a whole different category of discussion. That's like way on the other side of that would be a debate me and Nehemiah would have on another show or something. About Jesus.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
So here's a major spanner. We're going to throw like a massive spanner in the works. So one of the key things of the mystical experience is the ineffable nature. I mean, it's really hard to describe. It's really hard to put in words. Like I put that into words, but it doesn't capture.
No, it doesn't. And that's
right?
What
now,
even Thomas
so we're going to take this. We're going to take this
Tumsday
one step further, and then we're going to make something that's obvious based on that fact. The obvious is the experience. One of the hallmarks of the experience is it's ineffable. Language is very hard to describe this thing. So now we have a problem. All scripture is written in language. Oh, shit. How do we deal with that? This is a problem, isn't it? Anybody who bases their religious construct purely on the literature runs into the problem that they've all described the supreme reality as being indescribable. And yet we're supposed to base our concrete reality based solely on words. This doesn't work.
Of course,
so what you have is orthodoxy is generally not based in religious experience. Orthodoxy is based on a written word. Our friend here hasn't had a religious experience that describes God in a way that goes outside of the confines of his orthodox structure. And that's not a criticism. He may have religious experience that haven't challenged his borders, but he hasn't had one that has. When you have the ones that do challenge that border, what you'll find is when you go back and actually read scripture, is that usually the scripture, if you read it in with a different flashlight and a different way you approach language, that usually you can see that they're alluding to or trying to describe the experience that they have. I do not hold the position that I hold the position, I have no problem accepting that scripture is divinely inspired. I do not hold the position that scripture is not subject to the ravages of time, nor is it not subject to the machinations of human nature. Therefore, I would approach religious experience and scripture as two things that you use to help weigh each other up. I use scripture to help me go, let me help understand my religious experience, but my religious experience largely informs how I understand and accept scripture. And generally speaking, I find that the scripture is actually relatively very good at trying to elucidate what's in the mystical experience, but often gets interpreted in a way, because people use, especially in English, it's very definite. It's very confined. Whereas, like, if you were, for example, if you were to go through Sanskrit is a language that's it's based on inference. It's not defined. And it's, I think, a much better language to try to express these things. But you're always gonna, so I hear Bunya Samhita, which is a scripture, starts with a conversation between Shiva and Narada. And Shiva says, I'm gonna try to teach you these things, but know that whatever I teach you is gonna be somewhat wrong right out the gate, because I've put it into words.
Well, just to touch on what I was trying to get to with my thoughts there was, you have this experience, Nehemiah, where you believe God, the creator of the universe, the creator of everything, has said to you, I am the atoms.
Yep.
So that was a tremendous personal, spiritual experience, a religious experience that you had.
Yep.
Russell, I asked you if that conforms with your version of reality. If you believe that God is also that God is the atoms. Now, I don't know if I got a full yes or no, but I feel like that you're leaning towards no, that you more align with the Christian God.
Right.
So my question would be, or maybe you can clarify, yes, with a yes or no, do you believe that God is the atoms?
So I believe that Jesus is the Word, right? So you see how they describe that in language, right? So, I think that Nehemiah could be onto something where he's saying, I am the atoms. I don't think it's pantheistic, like he's the actual atoms. I think I know what he's trying to say is that the English language is very precise. It's literal. It's wooden literal. Okay. I mean, it's really, it is that way. And that's because it's developed in a time where a certain sort of empiricism has dominated the scene. Okay. And I don't want to say that's a bad thing. That's a very good thing. I think empiricism is very important. Okay. However, when you look at the ancient languages and you look at symbolism in the ancient languages, and even in Sanskrit, and you're looking at any of the ancient Near Eastern languages, these languages are what we call expressive. So you have to understand them before you can make a conclusion.
I understand, but what I'm asking is, Nehemiah heard from God that God is the atoms, and I'm just asking for a yes or no. Do you agree with that?
I would say no. It depends on how you're phrasing it. Do I believe Jesus is an actual word?
I'm kind of with you, David.
So yeah.
Well, hang on. I just want to get to my point, because I haven't even got to my point yet. I was just asking.
Go ahead, bud. Go ahead.
I just need a yes or no. I just need a yes or no.
We get all into this, man.
Okay. So my point was, okay. So Nehemiah is pointing to some like epistemological truth from his religious experience. You're not accepting that, Russell, because it strains your perspective of this religious truth, right? It doesn't align with what the Bible teaches. It doesn't align with your orthodoxy, right? Let me finish. You can clarify, right? But you don't agree, you don't accept it for whatever reason. Now, what I'm saying is, I'm not denying that Nehemiah had this experience. I just don't know if it points to any true thing in the universe. It might point to people's like people having subjective experiences that are similar. It might point to some psychological effects, some neuroscientific perspectives. It might point to something that is natural that we don't have any answer for yet. Maybe there is such things as like natural ghosts that run around that you couldn't classify as supernatural, but they're natural. But we don't. I don't think it's pointing to anything that's actually true, like a true thing in the universe, and I think that's easily demonstrable by the fact that you're claiming religious experience on one side and don't agree with the interpretation of what Nehemiah is saying on the other experience. So like to me, like you can tap dance around like, well, it's different meanings and different things, but at the end of the day, no one's saying anything. Yeah. Sure.
Let's get Russell's response first, then we'll go back to you, Nehemiah, and then I have a question in the chat related to this. So,
well, that's the youth pastor in you, man. You have to examine all things in light of Scripture and hold fast to that. It's true. Hey, I was a youth pastor too, bud. So,
cool.
like I said, we're a lot closer than you think on those areas. But yeah. So I would actually say I would have to know. Like, look, I'm going to look at Nehemiah's experience. I'm going to be honest, straight out. Right? I'm looking at Nehemiah, what he just told me. I'm not going to assume that he's not telling me something that's true, that he experienced something, and that's true. Okay. Now, how he identifies it, even if it goes against what I believe, I still am going to take his story and investigate it from what I believe is reality, what I believe is coherent to reality. So I'm going to do that in my own way. What I'm trying to say is that I can't deny that he had a religious experience.
I believe he had a religious experience as well.
Even though he had a religious experience, and I believe that Nehemiah is a human being, and he is open to misinterpretation. I'm open to misinterpretation. So I'm putting myself on the level. But the first thing I'm not going to do is do what I would believe a settled naturalist would do, and say that Nehemiah is deceptive. Be a problem.
So I don't think well, I believe
settled naturalist would have to go that route. How else?
I don't know what a
settled.
I don't know what it. Well, they wouldn't have to. A settled naturalist could say Nehemiah was just having an experience, a subjective experience. Why does it have to be supernatural?
Because he said it was. Because he said it was. He said God talked to him.
Okay.
Nehemiah, would you like to tell us about your experience?
Okay, go ahead.
I'm
sorry. I'm just nerding out.
No, it's great. I don't have. First of all, like even for me personally, I don't like the word supernatural because I think it is 100% natural. I don't think that God is something outside of the world. I think the world is very much part of God, and I could explain that. Like, for example, my experience, I say that God is the atoms. Well, I could explain that with the Bible. That's not very hard, actually. God says first there was the Word. I am the Word. Then he says, let there be light. He uses the words to invoke the light. So the Word was God. The light was God. Then he goes then I created blah, 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 blah. He uses the Word to create all those things. That is the Word. The creation is the Word.
Well, then you got to
God is the Word. So God is all of that.
Nehemiah, you got to also think about what is the Word, because you're acting like God has a voice box and lungs at that point when you're saying words. So
sure,
it's
but
obviously
either way
that
you do it,
however
you want to do that, you'll still get to God is the Word, and He used the Word to create everything. Everything He put into creating, He uses through the Word, the logos. That's the Christian way. Now I could do that I could take it from my perspective. I don't have an issue, but what I would like to bring forth is what I would challenge here is that I do think that Russell's religious framework is an intellectual framework, not an experiential framework, and those two things haven't married to each other yet. Some of it maybe he has religious experience that has informed aspects of his beliefs, but I don't know that he's had the full-on experience to the point where it's collapses and he's come back. What you would call, like, every religion has a sense of twice born, that there's a death and there's a coming back. There's the you before and there's the you after. And in peak religious experience, there's a you after. In our tradition, it's called Dvija Bandhu, Dvija, twice born. So I do think that Russell's perspective on that, and him seeing the duality of God and the world, is based on his framework as he has it, and has it accommodated, and I would even say accommodated in his own ego structure. And if you were to go consistently, like if we read this mystical, the questionnaire, what you're going to find is a consistency in experience of non-duality. The 30 factors are, so if we read down this questionnaire, the mystical experience questionnaire, factor 1 is the mystical realm. Freedom from limitations of your personal self and feeling of a unity or bond with what was felt to be greater than your personal self. 2, experience of pure being and pure awareness beyond the world of sense impressions. Experience of oneness in relation to the inner world within. Experience of fusion of your personal self into a larger whole. Experience of unity with ultimate reality. Feeling that you experienced eternity or infinity. Experience of oneness or unity with objects and or persons perceived in your surroundings. Experience of the insight that all is one. Awareness of the life or living presence in all things. Gains of insightful knowledge experienced at an intuitive level. Certainty of encounter with ultimate reality in the sense of being able to know and see what really is real at some point during your experience. You are convinced now, as you look back on your experience, that in it you encountered ultimate reality, that you knew and saw that what was real, a sense of being at a spiritual height, sense of reverence, feeling that you experienced something profound, sacred, and holy. Experience of amazement, feelings of tenderness and gentleness, feelings of peace and tranquility, experience of ecstasy, sense of awe and awesomeness, feeling of joy, loss of your usual sense of time, loss of your sense of space, loss of your usual awareness of where you were, sense of being outside of time, beyond past and future, being in a realm with no space boundaries, experience of timelessness, sense that the experience cannot be described adequately in words, feeling that you could not do justice to your experience by describing it in words, feeling that would be difficult to communicate your own experience to others who have not had similar experiences. These are the 30 traits that get rated on a 1 to 5, and how people get the mystical experience, you could say, I guess, qualified. And this is a consistency. So, like, for example, I posted yesterday on my own Facebook page an experience that that in a sense touched my own nerve, because it's very much like the experience I just described to you. And this experience was had by a Sufi saint. And if I could just pull this up and read it to you, it's quite wonderful. And it's very much like mine.
While you're
and
doing
so
that,
what I think
Nima,
is that when you transcend your
I want to come
own,
back to you
you have
real
a
quick.
intellectual
Sorry.
study. Yep.
Nima, real
Go
quick.
for it.
I'll let you read it. I want to hear what you have to say there. We do have a question that you kind of already have answered.
I've got it right here. Let me, if I could read it real quick, and then
go for it.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Go for it. Okay. So this is from Muhammad ibn al-Arabi. He says, when the mystery of the oneness of the soul and the divine is revealed to you, you will understand that you are no other than God. Then you will see all your actions to be his actions, and all your attributes to be his attributes, and your essence to be his essence. Thus, instead of your own essence, there is the essence of God, and in place of your attributes, there is the attributes of God. He who knows himself sees his whole existence to be the divine existence, but does not experience that any change has taken place in his own nature or qualities. For when you know yourself, your sense of limited identity vanishes, and you know that you and God are one and the same. There is no existence but his existence. This means that the existence of the beggar is his existence, and the existence of the sick is his existence. Now, when this is admitted, it is acknowledged that all existence is his existence, and that the existence of all created things, both accident and substances, is his existence. And when the secret of one particle of the atoms is clear, the secret of all created things, both outward and inward, is clear. And you do not see in this world or the next anything except God. Nothing but the reality is. There is no separate being, no arriving, and no being far away. This is seen in true vision. When I experienced it, I saw nothing but him. When my beloved appears, with what eyes do I see him? With his eyes, not with mine. For no one sees him except himself. It is none other than he who progresses or journeys as you. There is nothing to be known but he, and since he is being itself, he is therefore also the journeyer. There is no knower but he. So who are you? Know your true reality. He is the essential self of all, but he conceals it by the appearance of otherness, which is you. This is the experience that's similar and shared by people time and time again, and I've had it over and over again. I find what he said to be absolutely true. I stand by him completely, and I accept him as my brother. And I think when you have the experience for yourself, you'll see that exact same thing for yourself, and it will move you to tears.
Thank you, Nehemiah. Russell, I want to hand this over to you. So there's P. Barnes wanted to clarify the question that they asked earlier. He said that there are specific differences between the experience, some unique to a religious experience. Can one be described, I guess, can a religious experience be described that would be able to identify it?
Well,
So,
yeah,
go
I
ahead.
do. Mike, I think we answered that earlier. I could give you case
Okay.
studies. I can give you guys case studies. I mean, I really can.
Sure.
And again, you look at books like from Miss Davis, Dr. Davis, and you'll see some of these case studies as well. And you could put it in the description if you'd like, so people can do some further
Absolutely.
research into it.
That'd be great.
But I did want to come back upon what something Nehemiah said. And you guys are gonna love it because this is where we disagree.
Sure.
He threw out there that my view is intellectual versus experiential, right?
Sure.
But you see, I don't see a difference in that. I see I see the intellectual and the experiential on the same plane. I believe that intellectual experience is an experience. So I mean, there's a lot to it. I don't divide it like he does in that aspect.
Is your intellectual based on the books and the words in English as they are, or were they based on the words and the English that came to you from God?
On a plethora of things.
Okay.
There's a many different things it's based on, and
Sure.
they're all part of it. They're all part of it, whether they're books on a page because I believe they're divinely inspired,
Okay.
or whether they're experienced to me directly. Through illumination and so forth. There's a lot of categories, and this is what I
So I
try
have to make sure that I am
you.
also I have to apologize, I guess.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
I don't want to.
You don't have to apologize.
I hope that wasn't taken as belligerent or offensive in some kind of way. I wasn't.
No, I get it, bud. I know you weren't. I know you weren't. But I wanted to clarify
that. I don't begrudge you wherever you are.
You see,
because your conclusion is where you're at.
As a Christian,
that's where you're at, and that's okay.
So a Christian would say that we love God with our heart, soul, body, and mind, right? So I think all those play a factor, and I do believe that they pour into that religious experience. So I do believe that all aspects need to be included because I think as even you guys, even in Australia, you guys have Western influence. Okay. Definitely. So with that mindset, I would say that we oftentimes try to make a certain and we do it unknowingly at times is we make a certain presentation or something we said, we try to take it in a monolithic way. And I don't think that's wise. I think we need to stop that. And it's going to come with time. It's going to come with getting to know each other better because it's one thing we lack in this world, even through the medium we're using right now, is personal relationship.
Yeah.
And I think that is if we were more communal, which we're designed to be, we would be a lot better off. But that's just me.
I agree.
So I told y'all that this would run about an hour and a half, and we are about at time. So what I would like to do to kind of close this out is I would like to go around the room and kind of get your final thoughts and reflections on what we've discussed thus far. So Russell, would you like to go first?
Sure, absolutely. I would say that what we've learned here tonight, and I'm grateful for Nehemiah. I mean, he started talking about a lot of things that I listened to, and my friend Josh on my show, he's been challenging me with, which is the other side of symbolic meanings and stuff like that. When it comes to Jordan Peterson and his interviews with the Peugeot brothers and stuff like that. Peugeot, I don't know if I said that right.
Peugeot,
yeah,
right.
Peugeot. Okay, so with those brothers, and they do bring a lot more to the table. And I'm still young in that journey because even in that journey, I try to marry the two logics, right? And I know people say, well, you can't be an epistemologist if you believe in externalism and internalism. And I'm like, well, is there a medium? and people keep telling me no, but I still keep trying to find it. But maybe I'll find it here too. But no, I do think the two can be married in that aspect. But the point and this is where the bottom line falls out, is that people have a religious experience, actual real religious experiences that can't be summed up in a psychological word, that can't be even put into that category. And we might be able to use psychology to try to define it and try to investigate it. But at the end of the day, since William James, we've had a lot of people examining compelling religious experiences that will put a real damper in a committed naturalist position, which would say, look, something exists outside of us. You might not want to call it supernatural, but guess what? It's something outside of us. And I think that that's convincing. I think it's compelling. I don't give a lot of credence to those that just try to push out the religious experience, which none of our agnostic atheist friends have done, which is fabulous. This is the type of environment we need to learn from each other on, and we have to take all these things into consideration. So I would say that, yeah, I learned a lot from this. Nehemiah, you were a great battle partner here in that respect. You did a lot of explaining. And, I love to listen as well. I love to learn, and, I'm going to continue that. And yeah, you guys are great, and this is fun.
Nehemiah, would you like to give us your closing thoughts?
I would also like to thank everyone for participating. It was a tremendous pleasure to speak with you all. I hope that I wasn't too dominating in my enthusiasm. And I really appreciate both of your perspectives. It's always fun to step outside of your echo chamber, either of the echo chamber of your mind or the echo chamber of your sangha, your associates, and so on and so forth. It challenges you to think and present things in a different way than you're typically used to, and I really appreciate that opportunity. I would. Especially with someone like you, David. Well, both of you are Davids, but David McDonald, where you had. I find it really interesting that you had religious experiences, and you are where you are, and I think that's it gives you a unique perspective. I personally value, and I had my own journey of dropping everything. Pretty much, just like take off all your concept. Like I said, I think Buddha's methodology of dropping all the concepts is a really important thing, and so I would highly support you in that. I see nothing wrong in that whatsoever, even though I may take a very strongly different stance. I think that it's a valuable endeavor to do, and it'll be very interesting where it takes you. I wish you all the best in that.
Thank you.
David McDonald, go ahead.
So if I could take a couple minutes, that'd be great. But essentially, I started my whole venture into trying to understand my internal experiences and the nature of the universe and things with a mantra. And the mantra was, rather than love, than money, than fame, give me truth, which is a quote from I'll just move Henry David Thoreau, who's an amazing poet, amazing writer, and that really encompassed like what I was doing when I was trying to analyze my internal experience. And I just came to believe that that because we have conflicting worldviews, that these for me and the other people who experience these things, they can't necessarily be pointing to certain things. So I'll give you a couple examples. When I first went traveling, I was standing outside a Buddhist temple in Shinto temple in Japan, and I was watching people blow incense on their face. And I asked my little brother who was living in Japan at the time, what are they doing? And he said, oh, well, they do that as a cleansing ceremony before they walk into the temple. And I said, okay, cool. And then I was like watching them with a bunch of tourists, and a bunch of people were doing it as well. And I could have done it if I wanted to. And I asked myself, are they really being cleansed? Like, is something happening to them in the spirit realm where their spirit, and I was a Christian at the time, is actually being cleansed? And then I thought to myself, if someone could prove, like someone could have a cleansometer and could prove that they weren't being cleansed, would that change anything about their behavior? Would they actually stop doing this ritual? Or is maybe this subjective experience of what they believe is happening to them, is that enough? Maybe it has nothing to do with objective reality. Maybe it just has to do with how they feel about it. Maybe that is the whole point. Please don't interrupt. So I was like, okay, that was one thing, and then next thing, and I was that really stayed with me. And then I was like, okay, even if it wasn't true, I don't think they would change anything, right? And I think it misses the point. And then when I was in Scotland a few weeks later, we were told about fairies, and these fairies would come and they would this one lady got grabbed on the ankle in some cave in the Highlands of Scotland, and this fairy, she would see this fairy wake up and sit on her chest every day. And I thought, a classic demon. And the tour guide talked about this. He saw it. He saw this lady screaming, and I was just like, oh, classic demon. And then I thought, well, hang on, the demons in the Bible, they used to beat people up. And then I was like, and what's this demon doing if it's just sitting on someone's chest and just looking at this person? I was like, it doesn't really like, and it's like, it seems like if this lady just rolled over and just didn't care and went back to sleep, the demon would lose all its power because it's only there this fairy's only there to scare her, right? And I was like, why would the tools of psychology be able to work on this spiritual thing, right? This religious thing. So I started to question that, and then I thought, well, if those things are happening for other people with fairies, with Buddhist temples, why can't I point the same thing about my experiences? Why are my experiences special? And that was something that I realized that I didn't think they could be special. So, and I find it interesting that in this conversation, and I thank you guys for coming on, this has been an interesting conversation, and I noticed that look like I'm frowning the whole time. I'm just thinking that's just I have resting bitch face, but essentially, so it seems, though, besides the one thing that you said, Nehemiah, that we didn't go into about the Sanskrit, that I'd love to learn more about one time, everything that we have talked about today as religious experiences could easily, and I would argue most likely, be explained by psychological phenomenon, or at least an internal experience. Like everything that we've talked about, that every example that we've brought up as a religious experience could all be explained.
I would put them all as internal experiences.
Yeah. Oh, well,
I don't make distinction.
Religious experience. So,
no, but I need to make this very clear. God is an internal experience.
Okay. Yeah, I get. Okay. So, and just to wrap things up perfectly, and to give a little bit of promo to the later episode today of Deep Drinks, if anyone wants to check that out, in William James's book, got it right here.
Yep.
He said in this chapter, he said, the drunken consciousness is one bit of the mystic consciousness, and our total opinion of it must find its place in our opinion of that larger whole.
Okay.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but that means that on Deep Drinks later today, when Tate and I discuss his exorcism that he experienced when his mum brought him there because he was gay, that when we're drinking the spirits that we'll be drinking today, that we will be having a religious and mystical experience, because it's part, as William James says, the drunken consciousness is one bit of the mystical consciousness. So if that's true, then you've convinced me
exactly
that the religious experience is a-okay. And with that, I'll say thanks for having me on, Michael.
So this is I appreciate all of you for participating. It sounds like we need to do a part 2 of this, so you'll be getting a follow-up message here from me shortly. I've put all of our panelist information in the description of this video. If you would like to hear more from David Russell, hear what he has to say, he has a fantastic program called Faith Unaltered, which I've been on. David, like I said before, was very gracious, fantastic host, made me feel very comfortable, so please check him out there. David McDonald has a podcast that I've been on as well called Deep Drinks. Got an episode, as he said, happening later. You can find more about Nehemiah in the description. And thank you all for joining. Thank you all for participating. If you like the format of this, please leave me a comment in the description. Let me know if there's other topics that you would, or maybe if you want to hear a part 2 from our panelist. So thanks for joining. To our panelists, for everybody in the chat, everyone have a good night.
See ya.
See y'all later.